The plane dropped without warning. Not a gentle dip, not turbulence you laugh about later. It was a violent, stomach-twisting fall that ripped the air out of the cabin. Overhead bins burst open. A suitcase slammed into the aisle. Someone screamed. The lights flickered once, then twice, and for a split second, the entire aircraft felt weightless, as if it had let go of the sky. A child cried out for her mother. A man shouted an obscenity. Another voice began to sob uncontrollably. The sound of the engines changed, low, uneven, wrong. And then, above the chaos, above the crying, above the panic, a single voice rose from the middle of the cabin, strong, clear, unshaken. Jesus! The name echoed through the aircraft like a shockwave, not screamed in fear, not whispered in despair, but shouted with conviction. For 2 heartbeats, my everything froze. The screaming stopped. The crying softened. Even the turbulence seemed to hesitate. No one knew yet whether the plane would survive. But something undeniable had just changed. Because in that moment, thousands of feet above the ground, a group of strangers stopped being passengers and became something else entirely. And what happened next would follow every one of them for the rest of their lives. Before we continue, if stories like this remind you that God still walks with us, even in the darkest moments, make sure to subscribe to Heaven Walks With Us. Here we share true-to-life stories of faith, fear, redemption, and hope. Stories that don't just entertain, but change how we see life, suffering, and grace. Because sometimes all it takes is one moment, one cry, one name spoken in faith to transform everything. Now, let's go back to the beginning. 3 hours earlier, the Denver International Airport was alive with its usual rhythm. Rolling suitcases echoed across polished floors. Departure boards blinked with destinations. Voices blended into a constant hum of movement and urgency. Ethan Carter moved through the terminal with purpose. 39 years old, civil project engineer, dark jacket, worn briefcase, phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah, I'll have the revised numbers before landing," he said, weaving past a family clustered around a gate. "Dallas needs to see we're solid on timeline and budget." This flight mattered. The deal waiting for him in Texas wasn't just another project. It was the kind of contract that reshaped careers. Data center construction? Millions on the line. Promotion potential written all over it. As he ended the call, Ethan exhaled and checked his watch. Late afternoon. Outside the massive glass windows, the Colorado sky stretched wide, but not calm. Thick clouds gathered in layers, gray bleeding into darker shades farther east. Storm warnings scrolled silently across a television near the gate. Ethan noticed and dismissed them. Planes flew through storms every day. He adjusted the strap of his briefcase and took his place in line to board Flight 782 to Dallas-Fort Worth. From the outside, Ethan looked confident, grounded, in control. But beneath that surface, something restless stirred. As he stepped forward, a memory brushed his thoughts, uninvited. His mother's voice years ago, as he rushed out the door. "Don't forget church, Ethan." He hadn't answered her then, and he hadn't gone. Not that Sunday, not the next, and eventually, not at all. Life got busy. Deadlines replaced devotion. Plans replaced prayer. Ethan had learned to rely on numbers, blueprints, and effort. Things he could measure. Things he could control. Faith felt inefficient. As he handed his boarding pass to the gate agent, another thought slipped through, quieter than the rest. "I haven't prayed in a long time." He pushed it aside immediately. Now wasn't the time. Inside the aircraft, cool air rushed over him as he found his seat near the middle, aisle side. Passengers settled in around him. A young woman nearby clutched a medical textbook a little too tightly. A mother buckled her daughter in by the window, whispering reassurances. A man with graying hair sat calmly a few rows ahead, eyes closed, hands folded. Not sleeping, but still. Ethan didn't know it yet, but in just a few hours, every one of these strangers would know his name, and he would remember theirs, Because this flight wasn't just carrying them to Dallas. It was carrying them straight into a moment none of them could escape. The cabin filled slowly, row by row, story by story. Ethan fastened his seatbelt and slid his briefcase beneath the seat in front of him. He glanced around, not out of curiosity but habit. Engineers were trained to observe, to notice details others missed. 2 seats to his right, a young woman sat rigidly upright, her shoulders tense. A thick emergency medicine textbook rested open on her lap, though her eyes weren't reading a single word. She inhaled, exhaled, too fast. Fear, Ethan thought. A few rows ahead, a mother leaned close to her daughter, tightening the little girl's belt with careful hands. "You okay? Sweetheart?" the woman whispered. The girl nodded, though her fingers gripped a stuffed rabbit like a lifeline. "I don't like when planes go bumpy," she said. "Me neither." The mother smiled softly. "But we'll be okay." Across the aisle, an older man adjusted his headphones, already half asleep. Somewhere farther back, a group of college students laughed loudly, oblivious to everything beyond their jokes. And then there was the man Ethan had noticed earlier. Mid-50s, maybe older. Simple clothes, no briefcase, no phone in his hands, just stillness. He sat a few rows forward, eyes closed, lips moving silently. Praying, Ethan realized. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard Flight 782 to Dallas-Fort Worth. Our flight time today will be approximately 2 hours and 20 minutes. Routine. Predictable." Ethan relaxed back into his seat. This was familiar territory. Airports, flights, work trips, life in transit. As the plane pushed back from the gate, the young woman beside him flinched slightly. "You okay?" Ethan asked, instinctively lowering his voice. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, sorry, flying makes me nervous." He offered a small smile. "You're not alone. Though I fly a lot, it still gets to people." She exhaled slowly. "I'm Mia. I'm in medical school. I work ER shifts, but this," she gestured vaguely upward, "this scares me more than blood." Ethan chuckled softly. "I'm Ethan, engineer. I like things that stay on the ground." That earned a brief smile from her. The engines roared louder as the plane rolled down the runway. A acceleration pressed them back into their seats. Mia's fingers tightened on the armrest. The plane lifted. Denver fell away beneath them, buildings shrinking, highways twisting into thin lines. For a moment, everything felt light, peaceful even. As the seatbelt sign remained lit, the mother ahead leaned her head gently against her daughter's. The praying man opened his eyes and looked around the cabin. Not anxious, not distracted. Present. Ethan noticed the sky outside his window. Those clouds hadn't gone anywhere. They were thicker now, darker, layered like walls stacked one behind another. He felt that strange thought return again. You never know how much control you really have until you lose it. The seatbelt sign finally clicked off. Passengers shifted. Conversations resumed. The plane leveled out. Normal. Just another flight. None of them knew yet that this calm was temporary, that soon fear would test every belief they carried on board, and that when the sky began to break apart, one voice would rise above them all. At cruising altitude, the cabin settled into a familiar rhythm. Seat belts clicked open. Tray tables dropped. The soft clatter of cups and ice echoed as flight attendants began their service. For a moment, it felt like the storm warnings back in Denver had been exaggerated. Outside Ethan's window, the clouds looked distant. Thick, yes, but calm. Like frozen waves in a gray ocean. He opened his laptop, pulling up spreadsheets and diagrams. Numbers steadied him. Columns aligned. Variables behaved. This was his world. Predictable. Logical. Beside him, Mia tried to read again, though her eyes drifted toward the window every few seconds. You're doing okay?" Ethan asked quietly. She nodded, though her smile was thin. "As long as it stays like this." A flight attendant passed, offering drinks. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yes, please," Ethan replied. Mia hesitated. "Water." As the cups were handed out, a soft laugh rippled from somewhere near the back of the cabin. Someone told a joke. A few people chuckled. Normal life resumed at 35,000 feet. Up ahead, Rachel began drawing with her daughter on a small notepad. "What are you making, Lily?" she asked. "A house," the girl answered, "with a big tree." "That's nice," Rachel smiled. Is that Grandma's house? Lily nodded enthusiastically. A few rows away, Father Daniel watched them with a gentle expression, then lowered his gaze and closed his eyes again. Ethan noticed him more clearly now. And there was something grounding about the man. Not dramatic, not loud, just steady. Ethan took a sip of coffee and glanced out the window again. The clouds were closer. Not much closer, but enough. The smooth blue above them had faded. The horizon looked heavier now, layered with darker shapes ahead. He felt a faint vibration beneath his feet. So subtle most people wouldn't notice. Mia noticed. "Did you feel that?" she asked, her voice tight. Ethan paused, listening. A low shudder passed through the fuselage like a distant drum. "Probably just air currents," he said. "Nothing unusual." The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're approaching a weather system ahead. You may experience some light turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The seatbelt sign chimed on. Around the cabin, people complied without urgency. Light turbulence. That phrase was practically comforting. Rachel buckled Lily in again. "Just like a bumpy road," she said softly. Lily nodded, though she hugged her stuffed rabbit closer. Mia's hands curled into fists on her lap. Ethan closed his laptop and slid it away. The plane shuddered again, slightly stronger this time. The drink cart rattled as a flight attendant steadied it with practiced ease. Still controlled, still normal. But something had changed. Not enough to cause panic, just enough to make the silence feel thinner. Ethan felt it in his chest. A quiet tension, like a warning his mind couldn't yet name. Outside, the clouds no longer looked distant. They were rising, stacked high and dense. They're filling the sky ahead like a wall. The aircraft continued forward, straight toward them, and somewhere deep inside Ethan, a thought he didn't want surfaced uninvited. What if this isn't just turbulence? He swallowed and pushed the thought away. Planes were built for storms. Pilots were trained for this. Everything was under control. At least, that's what he told himself, because none of them were ready yet to accept what was coming, and none of them knew how quickly calm could turn into chaos. Once the sky decided to stop cooperating. The first hard jolt came without warning. Not enough to throw anyone from their seat, but enough to silence the cabin. The plane dipped, recovered, then dipped again, sharper this time. A few gasps broke the quiet. Mia's breath caught. "That was stronger." Ethan nodded, eyes forward. "Yeah, a bit." The seatbelt sign chimed again. Longer, more urgent. "Flight attendants, please take your seats." That line landed heavier than the turbulence itself. The drink cart rattled as it was hurriedly secured. A cup tipped, spilling coffee across a tray table. No one laughed it off this time. The aircraft shuddered again, left, then right, like something unseen had grabbed its wings. Rachel pulled Lily closer. "Hey, look at me," she whispered. "Breathe with Mommy." Lily's eyes were wide now. She nodded, but her lower lip trembled. Another jolt, stronger. A man 2 rows back muttered, "Jesus." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He had flown through turbulence before, plenty of times. But this was different. There was a rhythm to it, irregular, unpredictable. Like the sky itself couldn't decide what it wanted to do with him. Mia gripped the armrest, knuckles white. "I don't like this," she whispered. "It'll pass," Ethan said, though his voice lacked the confidence he wanted it to have. Outside the window, the clouds were no longer distant shapes. They surrounded the plane now. Gray swallowed everything. No horizon, no sense of direction, just movement. The aircraft lurched downward suddenly, then snapped back up. A woman screamed. Luggage shifted overhead, compartments creaking. Rachel instinctively covered Lily's ears. "It's okay," she repeated, though her own voice shook. "It's okay." Up ahead, Father Daniel opened his eyes. He didn't panic. He didn't rush. He simply looked around the cabin. Really looked. Fear was spreading, the kind that didn't explode all at once, but seeped into every breath. Another announcement crackled over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We are experiencing moderate turbulence." Moderate. Ethan almost laughed at the word. The plane dropped again, hard enough this time to send a ripple of cries through the cabin. Mia squeezed her eyes shut. This is exactly what I'm afraid of. Ethan reached out without thinking and placed his hand over hers. She didn't pull away. The lights flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. A hush fell, followed by whispered prayers, hurried breaths, and the unmistakable sound of panic trying to stay quiet. Someone began to cry softly. Another voice spoke louder. "Is this normal?" No one answered. The aircraft shook again, longer this time, the metal groaning as if strained. Ethan's mind raced, not with numbers, not with logic, but with something raw. What if control is an illusion? The thought unsettled him more than the turbulence. Ahead, Lily began to sob. "Mama, I'm scared." Rachel pressed her forehead to her daughter's. "I know, baby, I know." The sky outside offered no comfort, only movement, only force. The plane pushed forward anyway, deeper into the storm, and somewhere between one breath and the next, Ethan realized something had shifted. This was no longer just uncomfortable, no longer just turbulence. The calm they'd trusted was gone, and something far more serious had taken its place. The turbulence didn't stop. It stacked. One jolt followed another, short, sharp movements that rattled teeth and nerves alike. The plane no longer felt like it was gliding. It felt like it was fighting. The overhead lights dimmed slightly, then steadied. Not enough to cause alarm, but enough to be noticed. Ethan felt the tension spread through the cabin like static electricity. People weren't screaming yet. They were doing something more dangerous. They were waiting, waiting for reassurance, waiting for control to return, waiting to find out if this would pass or get worse. Mia's breathing grew shallow. "I can't tell what's happening," she said. "I can't see anything." Outside the window there was nothing to see, just thick gray clouds rushing past, fast and close, like the plane was slicing through smoke. Another sudden drop. This time the collective reaction was instant. Gasps, sharp cries. Someone yelled, "Hey!" A child wailed openly now. Rachel wrapped both arms around Lily, rocking slightly with the movement of the aircraft. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Will you listen to my voice?" Lily nodded, face buried against her mother's chest. Up the aisle, a man stood briefly, then sat back down as the plane lurched again. "Sir, please remain seated," a flight attendant called out, her voice firm but strained. Ethan watched the crew closely now. They moved faster, more focused. One of them checked an overhead compartment twice, then locked it hard. Another braced herself against a seat, eyes scanning the cabin. That's when Ethan knew. They were concerned, not panicking, but concerned. The captain's voice came on again, clearer this time, but different, lower, more deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are encountering stronger turbulence than anticipated. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened at all times. No jokes, no reassurances, just instruction." Mia swallowed hard. "Shia, that didn't sound good." Ethan didn't answer. He was listening, not just to the captain, but to the plane itself. The engine still roared, but the sound wasn't steady anymore. It wavered, subtle, but real. The aircraft shuddered violently, side to side, as if something had struck it from below. A scream tore through the cabin. Someone shouted a prayer aloud. Another voice cracked as it called out for God, any God, to help. Ethan felt a cold line of sweat trace down his back. He tried to ground himself. Planes are designed for this. Pilots train for this. You are safer here than on the road. But logic felt thin now, fragile. Another sharp jolt slammed through the fuselage, hard enough to knock a phone from someone's hands. It clattered down the aisle. Rachel gasped. Lily screamed. Mia's fingers dug into Ethan's sleeve. Please tell me this is normal." Ethan opened his mouth and stopped, because for the first time since boarding, he didn't know what to say. Up ahead, Father Daniel slowly unbuckled his seatbelt, not in haste, with intention. He rose just enough to steady himself against the seatbacks, his eyes calm as they swept across the cabin. He saw fear everywhere, but he also saw something else. People were searching, not for exits, not for instructions, for something to hold on to. The plane jolted again, harder than before. A metallic rattle echoed from above, and somewhere deep inside the aircraft, something shifted, something serious. Ethan felt it before he understood it. A change in pressure, a change in sound, a change in the air itself. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. It was only beginning. The sound came first, not a scream, not an alarm. A sharp metallic bang, like something snapping loose inside the aircraft. The plane lurched violently downward, harder than anything before. People were thrown forward against their seatbelts as a wave of weightlessness tore through the cabin. Then, the mast dropped. Plastic panels burst open overhead, releasing rows of yellow oxygen masks that swung wildly on thin tubes, colliding with seats, faces, and shoulders. The cabin erupted. Shouts, cries, pure, unfiltered panic. "Put your mask on first," a flight attendant shouted, her voice nearly swallowed by the chaos. Mia froze. Her eyes locked onto the mask in front of her as it bounced against the seat. I can't," she stammered. Ethan grabbed it instinctively, pulling it toward her face. "Breathe. Just breathe." Her hands shook as he secured the elastic behind her head. "Sure, that's it," he said. "Slow breaths." She nodded, tears streaming freely now. Across the aisle, a man fumbled with his mask, dropping it. Another passenger reached over to help him without being asked. Rachel was already pulling Lily's mask down, her hands trembling so badly she struggled to fit it over her daughter's small face. "It's okay, baby," she whispered desperately. "Mommy's here. Mommy's right here." Lily sobbed, her breath coming in short, frightened gasps beneath the plastic. The plane dropped again. Screams filled the cabin as loose objects slid across the floor. A drink cart tipped over, spilling ice and cups that skidded down the aisle. Someone shouted, "We're going down!" Another voice yelled, "Hold on!" The engines roared, but not evenly. One sounded strained, uneven, wrong. Ethan felt his ears pop as the pressure shifted, or the air felt thin, sharp in his lungs even through the mask. He glanced toward the front of the cabin. Father Daniel was on his feet now, not panicked, not rushing. He moved carefully down the aisle, bracing himself against seatbacks as the plane shuddered again. An elderly woman near the window struggled with her mask, her hands weak and unsteady. Father Daniel knelt beside her, ignoring the turbulence. "Look at me," he said calmly. "I've got you." He adjusted the mask gently over her face, steadying her breathing with slow, deliberate motions. "You're not alone," he said. "Just breathe." Another violent jolt threw him forward, but he caught himself, gripping the seat. A flight attendant shouted from the galley, "Everyone stay seated, please stay seated." The lights flickered again, longer this time. The cabin groaned. Ethan felt fear rise like a wave in his chest. Not anxiety, not worry. Real fear, the kind that strips away confidence and leaves only instinct. Is this it? The thought struck him without warning. He saw flashes of his life, not memories, but moments unfinished. His mother standing at her kitchen counter, messages left unanswered, conversations postponed for later. Mia turned toward him, her eyes wide behind the mask. "Ethan," she gasped, Are we going to crash?" He stared at her. For once, the engineer had no calculations to offer. No reassurance grounded in logic, only silence. The plane shook again, so violently that several passengers cried out as one. The oxygen mask swung wildly, tapping against foreheads and shoulders like frantic pendulums. Some people prayed aloud now. Others cried. A few sat frozen, unable to move. The cabin felt smaller, tighter, as if the sky itself were pressing in. Father Daniel rose slowly back to his feet, gripping the seatbacks for balance. He looked around at the terrified faces, at the shaking hands, at the masks dangling like reminders of how fragile they all were. He drew a breath, deep and steady, and for the first time since the chaos began, his gaze sharpened with purpose. Something was about to happen, not in the cockpit, not in the engines, but here, among the people who no longer had anything left to hold on to. Except hope. The screaming slowly faded, not because the danger was gone, but because people were running out of breath. The plane still shook, though now in uneven waves. Short drops, sudden jerks, long grinding vibrations that rattled bones and nerves. But the chaos had changed. It was quieter, more terrifying. Oxygen masks swayed gently now, tapping against seats, brushing cheeks, their soft plastic sounds echoing in the cabin like a ticking clock. Tick, tick, tick. Ethan's heart pounded in his ears. He had stopped thinking in words. There were no plans left, no strategies, no calculations, only awareness. The awareness that control, real control, had never belonged to him. Around him, people clutched armrests, hands, sleeves, anything solid. Some stared straight ahead, eyes wide and empty. Others had closed their eyes completely, as if sight itself had become too heavy to bear. Mia sat rigid beside him, both hands pressed flat against her thighs, oxygen mask fogging slightly with each breath. "I don't want to die like this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm not ready." Ethan felt the words land deep inside him. Neither was he. Across the aisle, Rachel rocked Lily slowly, back and forth, humming a tune so soft it barely rose above the hum of the engines. The little girl had stopped crying, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she was exhausted. Her small hand clutched her mother's shirt, fingers tight with instinctive trust. "Mom," Lily murmured. "I'm here," Rachel answered instantly. "I'm not going anywhere." A man somewhere behind them began to sob openly. Another murmured fragments of a prayer, half remembered, stumbling over the words. Someone else whispered, "Please, please." No one laughed anymore. No one complained. No one checked their phones. Time felt suspended, stretched thin between heartbeats. In the aisle, Father Daniel stood motionless now, one hand gripping a seat back, the other resting at his side. He wasn't speaking. He was listening, listening to the breathing, the sobbing, the silence between them. This wasn't panic anymore. This was surrender, the kind that comes when fear has exhausted all its noise. Ethan stared at the floor, at a single cup that had rolled there and stopped. Such a small thing, and yet it felt symbolic. Everything that could fall had fallen. He felt something rise in his chest, tight, unfamiliar. Regret, not sharp, not dramatic, just heavy. He thought of his mother again, of how many times she had said, "Call me when you land," and how often he had forgotten, of how sure he had been that there would always be more time. The plane jolted again, less violent, but long enough to draw a collective gasp. A flight attendant shouted something from the front, but the words were lost in the roar of wind against metal. In the cockpit, unseen hands fought controls. In the cabin, unseen hearts fought despair. Ethan lifted his gaze. Father Daniel's eyes met his. There was no fear there, no denial either, just resolve. The priest took a slow breath, deep enough that it seemed to anchor him against the shaking of the aircraft. The cabin held its breath with him. For a fraction of a second, everything aligned. The fear, the silence, the waiting. It felt like standing at the edge of something irreversible, as if the next sound, whatever it might be, would decide what kind of people they would be in this moment. Ethan didn't know what he believed anymore, but he knew this. If anyone spoke now, it would matter. The next drop was the worst one yet. The plane fell, not sharply, but deeply. A long, sickening descent that made stomachs rise and hearts slam against ribs. 8 people cried out in one broken chorus. Mia gasped, her fingers clutching Ethan's sleeve. "Oh, God!" Rachel squeezed Lily so tight the little girl whimpered beneath her mask. Somewhere behind them, a man shouted in pure terror. The engines groaned, low, uneven, struggling. For one terrifying second, it felt as if the aircraft had simply given up. And then, a voice cut through everything. Not a scream, not a plea, a declaration. "Jesus!" The sound was strong, unshaken, alive. It didn't come from the cockpit. It didn't come from a place of authority. It came from the aisle. Heads lifted, eyes searched. Father Daniel stood there, gripping the seat backs with both hands, his feet planted wide for balance as the plane trembled beneath him. His oxygen mask hung loose at his chest. His eyes were steady. Jesus! He shouted again. The name echoed through the cabin like it had weight, like it carried something with it, something real. For a heartbeat, the noise dropped. Not the engines, not the storm, the people. The screaming stopped. The sobbing softened. It was as if the cabin itself had inhaled. Jesus, Father Daniel said again, this time slower. We put our lives in your hands. Another jolt rocked the plane, but something had shifted. A woman near the window whispered, Jesus! A man across the aisle repeated it, voice trembling. Jesus! Then another, and another. The name moved through the cabin, seat by seat, mouth by mouth. Not everyone shouted. Some whispered. Some mouthed it silently. But they all heard it. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He hadn't said that name like this in years. Not since childhood. Not since before life had taught him to rely only on himself. He remembered kneeling beside his bed as a boy, his mother's hand on his shoulder, a prayer spoken without fear. His lips parted. At first, nothing came out. Then, barely louder than breath. Jesus! The word felt foreign and familiar. Mia turned toward him, eyes shining behind her mask. Do you think he hears us? She asked, her voice shaking. Ethan didn't answer right away. He didn't know how. The plane jolted again. But the reaction was different this time. People reached for one another instead of pulling away. Hands clasped. Shoulders leaned together. Rachel whispered a simple prayer into Lily's ear. Jesus, please help us. Lily nodded, repeating it softly, imperfectly. Father Daniel raised his voice once more. Not shouting now, but leading. Don't be afraid, he said. Albert, you're not alone. Say his name if you can. Even once is enough. The storm didn't stop. The danger didn't vanish. But the cabin was no longer a place of isolated fear. It had become something else. A shared moment. A shared breath. Ethan felt it in his chest. Something loosening. The tight knot of panic gave way to something steadier. Hope. Not certainty. Hope. The plane shuddered violently again, but this time the cries were different. Shorter. Less desperate. People held on to seats, to hands, to words that felt bigger than the metal around them. Jesus, someone sobbed. Jesus, another replied. Mia squeezed Ethan's hand. Whatever happens, thank you. He looked at her, surprised. For what? For not letting go. Ethan swallowed hard. He realized then that this wasn't about surviving the crash. Not entirely. It was about who they were becoming in the middle of it. The name still echoed through the cabin, softly now but constant, a thread woven through fear. And for the first time since the sky had turned against them, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He wasn't facing this alone. None of them were. Nothing outside the aircraft had changed. The storm still raged. The plane still shook. The engines still struggled against invisible forces. But inside the cabin, something unmistakable had shifted. Fear was no longer running wild. It was being carried, shared, held. Ethan felt it first in the smallest of ways. A man across the aisle dropped his oxygen mask as another jolt rocked the plane. Before panic could return, someone reached out and handed it back. No words, just action. Mia noticed an elderly woman in the row ahead struggling to breathe, her mask slipping with every movement. Without waiting, Mia unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned forward, bracing herself against the seat. I'm here, she said firmly. Let me help you. Her hands still trembled, but they worked. She adjusted the elastic, guided the woman's breathing, counted slowly with her. In and out. That's it. The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. Mia didn't respond. She was too focused. Ethan watched her with quiet awe. Only minutes ago, she had been frozen by fear. Now she was steady, present, strong. 2 rows back, a man who had been shouting earlier now sat with his eyes closed, lips moving silently. His hand rested on the shoulder of the stranger beside him. Rachel rocked Lily gently, unwhispering words of comfort between short prayers. We're together, she said again and again. We're together. Lily's sobs softened. Her breathing slowed. Father Daniel moved carefully through the aisle, steadying himself with seat backs as the aircraft lurched. He didn't preach. He didn't lecture. He touched shoulders, met eyes, spoke softly. "You're doing well. Keep breathing. You're not alone." A flight attendant caught his gaze, her eyes wet with tears. "Thank you," she mouthed. The plane dipped again, hard, but instead of screams there were gasps and hands tightening together. Ethan felt a pressure in his chest, not panic this time, something heavier, something humbling. He realized that for years he had believed strength meant standing alone, handling things, not needing help. But here, suspended between earth and sky, Kerr's strength looked different. It looked like holding a stranger's hand, like sharing breath and courage in the dark. Mia returned to her seat, breathless but composed. "I didn't think I could do that," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. "You did more than most," she shook her head. "No, we all are." Another announcement crackled faintly from the cockpit, distorted by static. "And diverting, emergency landing." The words weren't clear, but the meaning was. They were trying. The captain was fighting for them. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, not to escape, but to be present. For the first time in years, he didn't ask for control. He asked for grace. The storm outside showed no mercy, but inside the cabin, something extraordinary was happening. Strangers were becoming protectors. Fear was becoming courage. And faith, whether whispered, shouted, or simply felt, was no longer an idea. It was movement. It was choice. The plane jolted again, violently, but this time, no one faced it alone. They faced it together. Inside the cockpit, there was no room for fear, only focus. Captain Mark Hollis gripped the control column with both hands, his jaw set tight as the aircraft shuddered beneath him. Warning lights flashed across the panel, amber then red, each one demanding attention. "Engine 2's surging," the first officer called out, eyes locked on the instruments. "We're losing stable thrust." "I feel it," Hollis replied, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Reduce power. Compensate with rudder." The plane lurched again, harder this time, as a violent downdraft slammed into the fuselage. The altimeter dipped. "Altitude dropping," the first officer said. "Rapid." Hollis adjusted the controls, fighting the aircraft like a living thing resisting him. Years of training kicked in, not as theory but instinct. Checklist, assess, decide. "We're not punching through this," he said. "Storm cell's too strong." Static crackled through the radio as he reached for the mic. "Mayday, mayday. This is Flight 782. Severe turbulence. Possible engine malfunction. Request immediate vectors to nearest suitable airport." The reply came broken, distorted. "Flight, Wichita, runway, stand by." Hollis exhaled sharply. Wichita. It wasn't ideal, but it was reachable, if the plane held together. "If we divert now, we can make it," the first officer said, though doubt edged his voice. "But we've got to commit." Hollis glanced briefly at a small object fixed near the panel, a simple wooden cross. Not decorative, personal. He hadn't put it there for emergencies. It had just stayed. "All right," he said. "We divert. Set course for Wichita. Manual control." The first officer nodded, fingers flying across switches and dials. "Autopilot's unstable. We're flying this by hand." "Then we fly it by hand," Hollis replied. Another violent jolt rocked the cockpit, alarms blaring in protest. Hollis leaned into the controls, muscles burning as he countered the force. "Easy, easy," he muttered, as if the plane could hear him. In his 23 years of flying, he had faced storms, mechanical failures, near misses. But this was different, not just because of the weather, because of the weight. More than 100 lives behind that cockpit door. Families, dreams, unfinished conversations. The first officer swallowed. "Cabin's probably in bad shape." Hollis didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, "They're counting on us." Another alarm chimed. He silenced it with a practiced motion. "We hold her together long enough to line up with that runway," he said. "That's all we need." The radio crackled again. Flight 782. Cleared. Emergency approach. Winds gusting. Hollis acknowledged and adjusted course. As the plane turned, the turbulence hit from the side, slamming them hard. The controls resisted, then responded. Barely. Come on, Hollis breathed. Don't quit on me now. In the back of his mind, a sound lingered. Not the alarms, not the engines. Voices, muffled, united. He didn't know what they were saying, but he knew what it meant. They were still fighting, and as long as they were fighting back there, he would fight up here. No matter how long it took, no matter how hard it got. The announcement came through the speakers in fragments at first, static, crackling. Then the captain's voice, low, controlled, unmistakably serious. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are diverting to Wichita for an emergency landing. Please remain seated. Follow all crew instructions. The words settled over the cabin like a heavy blanket. Emergency landing. No one screamed. No one argued. A few people gasped softly, as if the air itself had thinned again. Mia closed her eyes, inhaling slowly through the oxygen mask. So this is really happening, she whispered. Ethan nodded. Yeah, but he sounds steady. That helps, she said. More than you know. Across the aisle, Rachel tightened her hold on Lily. The little girl looked up, eyes wide but strangely calm. Yeah, Mom, Lily said softly. Are we going to be okay? Rachel swallowed, then met her daughter's gaze. I don't know exactly how, she said honestly, but I know we're not alone. Lily nodded, accepting that answer without question. Father Daniel stood again, careful and deliberate, bracing himself as the plane shuddered. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Listen to the crew, he said calmly. Stay seated, breathe, hold each other if you need to. A man near the back asked, his voice cracking, Father, are we going to die? Father Daniel paused, meeting the man's eyes. I don't know what will happen, he said gently, but I know this. Whatever comes, you won't face it alone. The plane dipped again, longer this time, drawing a collective breath from the cabin. Hands tightened. Some people closed their eyes. Others stared straight ahead, jaws clenched. Ethan felt Mia's hand slip into his. He didn't pull away. For once, he didn't feel the need to say something reassuring. Presence was enough. A flight attendant moved down the aisle, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. Brace position review, she instructed. When we tell you. Everyone listened. Everyone complied. This wasn't chaos anymore. It was cooperation. Ethan noticed the difference. Earlier, fear had made people small. Now it made them attentive, connected. The plane jolted again, harder, sending a ripple of murmurs through the cabin. Mia squeezed Ethan's hand. I don't want to die, she said quietly. But if I do, I'm glad I wasn't alone. Ethan felt something break open in his chest. No, he said firmly. We're getting through this. He didn't know if it was true, but he knew it mattered to say it. The oxygen mask swayed gently now, less frantic, as if the aircraft had found a fragile rhythm. Outside, the storm still battered them. Inside, something held. The captain's voice returned briefly. We're beginning our approach. Prepare for landing. A hush fell. Father Daniel bowed his head. Not everyone prayed. Some just breathed. Some just held hands. Some stared out into the gray, whispering words only they could hear. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. He didn't ask for success. He didn't ask for certainty. He asked for courage. The plane began its descent. Every second stretched, every sound sharpened, but the cabin stayed together. Whatever waited on the ground, they would meet it as one. The descent felt heavier than anything before it. Not faster, heavier. As if gravity itself had doubled its grip on the aircraft. The nose angled downward, slow and deliberate, while the storm pushed back with stubborn force. The plane shook, not wildly now, but with a deep, grinding resistance that could be felt in every bone. Brace. The word echoed silently in everyone's mind. A flight attendant's voice cut through the cabin. Brace position. Brace. Brace. Seats shifted. Bodies folded forward. Hands locked around heads and arms. Ethan leaned down instinctively, one hand gripping his ankles. the other still holding Mia's. She didn't let go. Neither did he. Around them, the cabin fell into a tense, breathless stillness, broken only by the roar of wind and engines straining at their limits. Outside the windows, nothing could be seen. No runway, no lights, just gray. And then, a sudden sideways shove slammed the plane hard to the left. The cabin groaned. A collective cry rose and fell just as quickly. Ethan felt his heart slam against his ribs. This is it, his mind whispered. But the plane corrected, slowly, painfully. Somewhere ahead, metal protested as the landing gear deployed with a heavy thud that reverberated through the floor. Clunk. The sound sent a wave through the cabin. Not of fear, but of awareness. They were really landing. Mia whispered through clenched teeth. Please, please. Rachel pressed Lily's head against her chest, shielding her completely. Close your eyes, sweetheart. Lily obeyed. Father Daniel bowed his head where he stood, braced against the seat back, lips moving silently. The engines changed pitch. Lower, or deeper, fighting to keep the aircraft steady as it cut through violent crosswinds. Another jolt. Harder. Someone screamed. The plane dropped a few more feet. Then, impact. A brutal, bone-shaking slam as the wheels struck the runway. The entire cabin lurched forward. Screams erupted. The sound of tires screeching against wet pavement tore through the aircraft as the plane bounced once, twice, then slammed down again. Ethan's head snapped forward, his body straining against the seatbelt. Pain flared in his shoulders. But the plane stayed down, still sliding, still shaking, but down. The roar of the engines reversed, screaming in protest as thrust pushed against momentum. The plane swerved slightly. People cried out again. Hands tightened, teeth clenched. And then, slowly, gradually, the violence softened. The screeching faded. The shaking lessened. Until finally, the aircraft rolled to a stop. Silence. Not immediate relief, not celebration, just silence. Broken only by heavy breathing, sobs, the soft hiss of oxygen still flowing through dangling masks. Ethan didn't move. He couldn't. His body trembled, not from fear now, but from release. Mia lifted her head slowly, eyes wide. Did we stop? She whispered. Ethan looked around. The cabin was still. The plane wasn't moving. We stopped, he said, his voice barely audible. I think we stopped. For a moment, no one spoke, as if saying anything might break the fragile reality of being alive. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom, hoarse, exhausted, but steady. Ladies and gentlemen, we are on the ground. Emergency crews are approaching the aircraft. Please remain seated. A sound rose from the cabin. Not a cheer, not shouting, but crying. Pure, uncontrolled, grateful crying. Rachel pressed her face into Lily's hair, shaking as she laughed and sobbed at the same time. Mia covered her mouth, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. Ethan closed his eyes. For the first time in hours, his chest expanded fully. A breath he didn't know he'd been holding finally escaped. They were alive, not because the storm was gentle, not because the danger wasn't real, but because somehow they had made it through, together. No one rushed to stand. No one reached for bags. For several long seconds, the cabin remained frozen, caught between what had almost happened and what had somehow been avoided. Then a quiet sound broke the stillness, a sob, followed by another. People cried openly now, not in fear but in release. Shoulders shook, hands covered faces. A few soft laughs escaped through tears, disbelief trying to turn into relief. Mia removed her oxygen mask with trembling fingers. Her breaths came uneven, but full. She looked at Ethan as if seeing him for the first time. "We're here," she said, her voice cracking. "We're actually here." Ethan nodded slowly. He tried to speak, but emotion closed his throat. Instead, he squeezed her hand once. Firm, grateful. Across the aisle, Rachel lifted Lily into her arms, holding her so tightly it was as if she might disappear if released. "It's over," she whispered into her daughter's hair. "You're safe." Lily looked around the quiet cabin, eyes wide with wonder. Did Jesus help us? Rachel paused, then smiled through tears. Yes, baby, I think he did. A few rows ahead, Father Daniel lowered himself carefully back into his seat. The tension finally drained from his posture. He closed his eyes, not to rest, but to give thanks. A flight attendant passed down the aisle, her professional composure finally cracking as tears streamed down her cheeks. You did amazing, someone said to her. She nodded, unable to respond. Emergency vehicles could be seen through the windows now, red lights flashing against the gray runway. Fire trucks, ambulances, ground crew rushing toward the aircraft. The captain's voice returned once more, steadier now, though exhaustion weighed on every word. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated until emergency personnel instruct us otherwise. On behalf of my crew, thank you. The word carried more meaning than usual. Thank you for staying calm. Thank you for listening. Thank you for not giving up. Ethan felt a strange heaviness in his chest. Not fear, not relief, but realization. He had boarded this plane believing strength meant control. That survival belonged to those who calculated well enough, planned far enough ahead. But nothing about what had just happened fit into an equation. They had survived because people helped each other, because fear didn't win, because when everything else fell away, something deeper had surfaced. Mia leaned back in her seat, staring at the ceiling. I don't know what I believe yet, she said softly, but I know this. Something changed in me up there. Ethan nodded. Me too. Around them, strangers made eye contact. Awkward smiles exchanged between people who had shared something too intense to ignore. A man across the aisle reached out and shook another's hand. Glad you're here, he said simply. So am I, came the reply. Father Daniel stood once more, though this time the movement was unhurried. He didn't address the whole cabin. He didn't need to. Those nearby heard him whisper, the miracle isn't just that we landed, it's who we became while falling. Ethan felt the words settle in him like truth. When the doors finally opened, fresh air rushed inside, cool and grounding. The smell of rain mixed with fuel and metal, strange, sharp, unforgettable. Passengers stood slowly now, legs unsteady, faces pale but alive. As Ethan stepped into the aisle, he looked back once, at the seats, the masks still dangling, the quiet that had replaced chaos. This plane had carried them through something no one could forget. And as he followed the line toward the exit, one thought echoed in his mind, clearer than any calculation he'd ever made. I don't want to live the same way anymore. The terminal at Wichita Regional Airport was quiet for a place that had just received an emergency landing. No crowds, no cameras, just tired faces and slow footsteps. Passengers sat scattered across rows of plastic chairs, wrapped in borrowed blankets, clutching paper cups of water handed out by airport staff and first responders. They looked ordinary, but nothing about them felt ordinary anymore. Ethan sat near a window, elbows on his knees, staring at the rain sliding down the glass. His hands still shook faintly, as if his body hadn't caught up with reality yet. He pulled out his phone. There were missed notifications, emails, calendar alerts, all the things that had mattered so much just hours ago. He ignored them. Instead, he scrolled to one name, Mom. For a moment, his thumb hovered. Then he pressed call. It rang once, twice. Ethan, his mother answered, surprise already turning into concern. Honey, what's wrong? His throat tightened. I'm okay, he said quickly. I needed to hear your voice. There was a pause on the other end. I've been praying, she said softly. Ethan closed his eyes. I know, he replied. I think I forgot how much that mattered. They didn't talk long. They didn't need to. Before hanging up, he said something he hadn't said in years. I love you. Across the terminal, Mia sat with her back against a pillar, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice trembled, but she didn't hang up. I'm sorry, she said. I shouldn't have stayed angry this long. A pause, then tears. Yes, I'm safe. I'm really safe. She nodded to herself as she listened, her shoulders slowly relaxing. Nearby, Rachel rocked Lily gently as the little girl dozed against her chest, exhausted. She kissed her daughter's hair and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. No longer from fear, but from gratitude. Father Daniel stood a short distance away, speaking quietly with a paramedic. He wasn't telling the story. He was listening. Captain Hollis emerged from a secured hallway a few minutes later, his uniform rumpled, face lined with exhaustion. A few passengers noticed and began to clap, softly at first, then stronger. Hollis raised a hand, embarrassed. "We all did our part," he said simply. "That's why you're here." Ethan watched him go, feeling a deep respect settle in his chest, not just for the man's skill, but for his humility. The announcements came eventually. Rebooked flights, hotel vouchers, apologies from the airline. Life resumed its logistics. Hey, but something lingered. People exchanged numbers. Hugs lasted longer than usual. Goodbyes felt heavier. As Ethan stood to leave, Mia walked over. "Hey," she said, "I don't know if we'll ever see each other again." He smiled faintly. "Probably not. But I'm glad we met," she said. "Up there, you helped me remember who I want to be." He nodded. "You reminded me too." They hugged, awkward, sincere, and then went their separate ways. As Ethan stepped outside into the cool night air, he felt the ground beneath his feet. Solid, reliable, not guaranteed. He took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about what came next. He was thinking about what mattered. And he knew, without needing proof or explanation, that whatever that voice had awakened in the sky, it wasn't finished with him yet. In the days that followed, life returned, quietly, insistently. Emails were answered, meetings rescheduled, suitcases unpacked. The world moved on. But for those who had been on Flight 782, something invisible had shifted, and it refused to settle back into place. Ethan drove home instead of flying. The road stretched long and familiar, the landscape steady beneath his tires. Somewhere between miles, he found himself turning the radio off, choosing silence. He needed to hear his own thoughts. He stopped at his mother's house without calling ahead. She opened the door, eyes widening, then softened immediately as she pulled him into a long, wordless embrace. They sat at the kitchen table, coffee steaming between them. Ethan didn't rush the story. He didn't dramatize it. He just told the truth. "Ian, when the plane started falling, I realized how much I'd been holding everything alone." His mother listened, hands wrapped around her mug. "And when someone shouted the name of Jesus," he continued, voice steady now, "it felt like something inside me woke up." She nodded slowly. "Faith has a way of doing that," she said. "Not when life is easy, but when we finally listen." Ethan didn't promise anything. He didn't need to. Some returns begin quietly. Mia went back to her ER rotations, but she signed up for something new, a volunteer medical clinic on weekends. She found herself more patient with fear, her own and others. She still hated flying, but she no longer believed fear had the final word. Rachel tucked Lily into bed that night and watched her daughter trace a picture with crayons. "What are you drawing?" Rachel asked. A plane," Lily said. "And people holding hands." Rachel smiled, eyes stinging. "Yes," she whispered. "That's what it looked like." Captain Hollis returned to the cockpit weeks later. Same uniform, same checklist. But he placed a small cross near the panel, not as a charm, not as a guarantee, as a reminder that even with skill, training, and experience, life is fragile and worth protecting together. Father Daniel never spoke about the flight unless asked. When people did ask, he always said the same thing. "I didn't save anyone. I just said the name I knew." And maybe that was the miracle. Not that the storm stopped, not that the plane landed, but that in the middle of free fall, people remembered who they were. They reached out. They listened. They believed, if only for a moment, that they were not alone. Some never returned to church. Or some did. Some couldn't explain what they felt. But none of them forgot it. Because sometimes heaven doesn't open with light or thunder. Sometimes it opens with a single word, spoken when everything else falls away. And sometimes that word is enough. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of a moment when fear met faith, then you're not alone. Here on Heaven Walks with Us, we share stories like this. Not to glorify fear, but to reveal hope where we least expect it. Stories of ordinary people, unexpected moments, and the quiet ways God still moves among us. If you haven't yet, subscribe to Heaven Walks with Us and click on the next video to continue walking these stories with us. Because sometimes the journey that changes us most is the one we never planned to take.